welcome everyone. First off, this is going to be a lot of fun today. Pat, amazing story of entrepreneurship, of being an entrepreneur as well. We have Bruce, another great entrepreneur, highly interesting stories. And one of my favorite parts about doing this is we get to bring these stories to you. So just to let you know a little bit about the format, I'll do a little bit of the questions. I'll get us started, but then we'll start at the end. There's going to be definitely time for a Q&A. Think of this as a, small, intimate fireside chat, and I'll get us kicked off. So first thing, let's start with the bios. All right. So Pat Turpin, president and co-founder of Pop Chips Inc. So I'm sure we've all heard of that brand. He was also vice president of Costco Wholesale Corp. And he also launched the Costco's gas station business, which I got a story about that for you, Pat. A good story. Harvard did a case study on Pat's launch of new businesses at Costco. So kind of a big deal when it comes to a lot of entrepreneurs in here that are launching brands, growing brands. I want to know what it's like to be behind that big brand. So we'll talk about that, and then also what you did at Pop. And Pat currently sits on the board of numerous food and beverage companies, which I'm interested as well to know about the personal brand and how you carry that brand through your career, because I see the pattern and I want to know the tips, man. So we're going to get into that. And then Bruce, on the other hand. So Bruce, his journey spans from the United States Marines, where he served, all the way to the LAPD, where he was awarded the highest award, the Police Medal for Bravery. Bruce, again, as I mentioned, he was an entrepreneur, and he did some amazing work at Quest, which we know those little Quest bars. And he's also now on his latest entrepreneurial venture, Legendary Foods, as Chirag mentioned. Great products over there. And I got a story about Bruce. So Bruce, yeah, this is a good one. So we'll get it kicked off. So the first time I met Bruce, and let me tell you what a fan I am of the Legendary products. I'm going into a studio in Brentwood, and I'm going to film some interviews, do some of this stuff. And the producer comes out to me and says, "Adam, I got something for you to try." And I'm like, "What do you got for me?" He's like, "Here, try this." And he brings out a Legendary bar, like the little cakes. And I'm like, "I brought my own." And he's like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, Legendary keeps me alive when I'm traveling, when I'm doing things. Like, it keeps me alive. He didn't believe me. I was like, so I opened up my briefcase and I'm like, my little bag, and I'm like, "Look, it's chocolate. You don't even have chocolate here today." And he's like, he looked like white as a ghost. Then Bruce comes out and he's like, Bruce is all confused. He's like, "Who is this guy? First of all, I've never seen you. I don't know what you're talking about." He comes up and he's like, I'm showing him this Legendary bar, and he's like, "Wait a minute." So when I see what Bruce is doing at Legendary, I'm amazed. I think it's amazing, and I'm interested to know the story. So transition from Quest at some point, and then deciding to launch your own brand and to go on that entrepreneurial pursuit. Talk to us about it.
We good? Can you hear me? Okay, great. Yeah, so the Quest journey was phenomenal, and we hit a peak of, believe it or not, $440 million in 5 years. That doesn't mean we didn't have our stumbles. We did some really crazy things when we were making. A lot of times brands make so much money they start doing things that are not relevant to getting product in people's hands, which is really the basic for any consumable item you have. But regardless, we sold Quest to Atkins Nutrition after 7 years total for $1 billion. Not just $1 billion, but $1 billion cash, which is, business, that's a unicorn. And the trivial thing, there's only been 1,100 billion-dollar companies in the entire world, so very few have sold for cash. But regardless of that, I was telling you earlier before we got on camera, Ron, our chairman, had this idea a year before we sold Quest. We went to the investment firm, and said, "We want to start this seasoned nuts and nut butter company." And they're like, "Yeah, sure, no big deal. It's no threat to us." And we started that actually a year before we sold Quest, and then once we sold Quest, we all exited, and it was great, and we all went full bore with Legendary. And then the pastries came out about 3 years into it, and the pastries, we call Legendary Quest 2.0 internally. All the mistakes we learned at Quest, we keep things lean and mean. It's all about getting products in people's hands. We're not going to do any crazy shit, Super Bowl commercials or music videos. It's all about getting product in people's hands, and that's going to be the key to our success. But right now we have pastries, sweet rolls, and chips, and we have some crazy things coming out for next year.
Amazing. Pat, all right, so Costco. I want to talk about the early days just a little bit here. So Costco, when I think about the gas stations, when I was reading up on your bio and I'm looking at this, I'm like, I spent an enormous amount of time in Costco gas stations. And the reason is because when I was in college, I was one of those armored car carriers, like, you know, the guys that go pick up the cash and all of that. This is before Uber, so you had to make a living, you had to, you know, figure out how you were paying for college. So I'd work on the weekends and I would be Costco gas stations. They were one of our best clients, and all day long I went from Costco to Costco all through all of Michigan. So, broad question, what was the magic in unveiling some of these things and opening something like gas stations and otherwise at Costco? What made that work? And I'll tell you, the employees there, like, unlike anything else, wearing the badges, they've been there forever, and at that point I'd seen pretty much every retailer. Like, what was the magic there?
So, whether it's gas stations or some of the vertically integrated food manufacturing business we created for Costco, any business from Costco, it was less about, okay, the company can make a lot of money getting into that business. It was more about if getting into a business delivered disproportionate value to Costco's members, because then it allowed Costco to raise the price of its membership. Because if you cut through all the noise, Costco makes all its money on membership, and the little bit of margin it takes just covers costs. So you could come up with an idea for something that would sell $1 billion and make the company $1 billion, and if it didn't deliver disproportionate value and align with the company's strategy, they'd say no. So the magic with gas was looking at, it was actually very simple when you cut through it all, that Costco owned their own land, so there's a big sunk cost they don't have to pay. They had excessively large parking lots. We didn't need branded gas because people trusted the Costco brand. We didn't need labor because you had pump technology in place at the time. And so you start going through all these things and you can start eliminating a lot of cost. And you put on top of it the fact that even though you had to make a profit, that wasn't the key. The key was, at Costco, the surveys of their members showed that they shopped at that time every 3 weeks. And so the feeling was, if gas brought them back into the store more often, you had more shopping frequency, then you had this $100 million revenue store that if you increase the comp store sales a few points on $100 million, that's a lot. And it actually ended up increasing the shopper frequency from like every 3 weeks to like almost 2.5. It increased the sales inside the store by 3 to 4 points. But again, if you're 150 million revenue, that's a lot of incremental revenue. And so it drove the value of the membership. And so the biggest whiff of the whole thing was I made the assumption that no one in their right mind would wait more than 3 cars deep for a tank of gas. And were we wrong?
You were also wrong in the statement excessively large parking lots.
Not anymore.
I don't know if I agree on that one. They're big, but it's still, depending where you're at, I'm running around looking for a spot. So during this time, or maybe not during this exact time, but at some point, so both of you in your careers had this point of being entrepreneurs, whether you working within Costco's confines or whether yourself, Bruce, working at Quest, taking that entrepreneurial leap. Like, what was that like? Whoever would like to start, either.
I use the word entrepreneur, so when I originally started helping the team, and it was early on, and I was the least qualified person to work at a nutrition company. I was a cop and then a bodyguard. And I met Shannon in the gym, and we became fast friends, and I started getting product in celebrities' hands just because they were cool people. And when I started helping them, I started kind of fall in love with the passion, what they were doing, and became much more of a protein bar company. We became a mission-based company, transforming lives. But I remember early on, Ron said, listen, Bruce, we have 99 problems here. And he still says it to this day, we have 99 problems, just help get problems off my plate. And I just did what I do, building relationships, get product in people's hands. But I just started taking things on and building out the events department, the ambassador program. And I became an entrepreneur because I really had no no rails. It wasn't like I had a job description per se, right? Because Ron was in charge of R&D and Mike was in charge of finance, so everyone had their responsibilities, and they never really wrangled me in. So I think everyone can be an entrepreneur inside their company, even if you might be a W-2 employee. It's just a matter of how far you want to push the limits.
And so what was it like to make the jump then? Now you go from entrepreneur to your own company with Legendary.
Well, I'm still part of the team. I'm not the owner. And I have my own business. You know what? I just realized it's interesting. Everyone wants to be an entrepreneur, they think to do, but then they go from working 40 hours a week to working 80 hours a week. And we still answer to people. One thing I've figured out in life, if you're in the customer service business, you're always answering to people. Even Elon Musk, as crazy as he is, you're always answering to people, and you have a board of directors, so it doesn't matter how successful you are, you still, are answering people. So even if you're an entrepreneur.
Yeah, for sure. Board members, board members, shareholders, everybody. Pat, same thing.
In my case, I launched 3 different businesses at Costco, but we ended up evaluating about 2 dozen. Most of them just never made it to the finish line of launching for various reasons. And really that caused me to get kind of bit by the entrepreneur bug because, some of these businesses became pretty successful. But, in a large company, you can create $1 billion business and your reward is, mine was a $25,000 raise, a title change, and an attaboy. And I realized that's not participation. And if I wanted to participate, I had to take the risk. And so it was probably the most difficult career decision of my life because Costco is an amazing company with wonderful people. I have friends to this day, but I knew I had to take the leap, and so I did. And it was really an opportunity not just to participate, do it on my own, but also take a lot of ideas where I'd see, hey, everybody does it this way. Why isn't anyone trying this? And be able to, realize some of your own, ideas and thoughts. I know there's a lot of entrepreneurs in the audience that you guys have all done as well. But the biggest change for me, it was the biggest shock, was having to manage my own balance sheet. When you're working for a large company, your project gets approved, the checks just get written. You got to meet your budget or you're fired, but you don't worry about where the money comes from. When it's your company, you're spending a disproportionate amount of time wondering where the money's coming from.
Great answer. Yeah. Any entrepreneurs in here? Do we want? Yeah, there we go. So everybody feels that one, I'm sure. 2 things that you both mentioned in your own ways: staying on brand, whether it's with what you're doing at Costco, whether it was pop chips or otherwise. Bruce, whether it's like you mentioning you're going to go out, you're going to get product in people's hands. What does that mean to you, staying on brand with your mission and what you're doing?
So I believe if you get 1,000 screaming fans, that's your key to become $1 million company. And this has nothing to do with social media. I say it like this: if people like you, they're going to listen. If they trust you, they're going to buy. But if you transform their lives, they're going to go to the highest mountaintops and scream your name. And that's exactly what happened at Quest. People would write us and say, I've got diabetes and my blood sugar is spiked. I've got celiac disease. I'm eating product. I've lost 30 pounds over the last 5 months. So when you get that kind of momentum, you create a mission, and that's what happened at Quest. Did I answer your question?
Being on brand. So probably the best example I can give on being on brand is my experience at Pop Chips. We knew that if we didn't create a culture, the employees would create a culture for us, and we might not like what they created. So we created something called the Principles of Pop, and it was what it meant to be the brand, but then their actions you take to live the brand. And it was everything from, how you conduct yourself to being generous, sharing product samples. Bruce passed the test. He showed up to the event with samples. I did the same. And you want everyone to embody the brand so there's no confusion about that. And then that starts translating into your communication, your messaging, and the consumer's perception. And ultimately, it became a major factor in how we interviewed and retained people. If they couldn't live those principles, it didn't matter how smart she or he was, we couldn't work it.
And I will add to that because it was a culture at Quest. It became a movement. If you saw my Jeep parked out front, it's wrapped in Legendary. Boss, my old marketing guy at Quest, I wore Quest apparel 7 days a week. Matter of fact, if I would go on a date, I'd have a nice button-up shirt that still said Quest. So, but that's talking about representing your brand, and that's what we created at Quest. Everyone wanted to wear our apparel. Everyone wanted to be part of this culty kind of cool club, and it really became a movement more so than just a protein bar.
So, Pat, for those marketing consumer products, talk about the distribution landscape and maybe how some things have changed through the years.
It's changed a lot, from what, just using kind of a gross measure of change, the pandemic, changed a lot of things. Not that the pandemic itself changed it, but since the pandemic began, a couple big things that whether it's food or non-food, you're selling through consumer channels. First is the retailers. There used to be, pre-pandemic, a lot of what I call cash flow friendly retailers. Where you could go into that retailer without high slotting fees, without a big cost to promote, other than the cost of, the promotion itself. If you're a natural or organic product, Whole Foods is a great example, right? And you would go into those cash flow friendly retailers, start building your data story, and then use that to get into bigger retail accounts. Well, fast forward to, since the middle of the pandemic, and that's all changed. They aren't cash flow friendly anymore. They're charging slotting. Whole Foods charges massive fees just to promote. So forget about the cost of the promotion. You're going to pay like $20,000 just to set up a promotion for one point. You start multiplying that by these other retailers, it requires a lot more capital. The other thing is the investor landscape, which many of you know. It's completely changed. The kind of free-flowing money for, don't worry, don't look over here at the bottom line, look at the top line, we're growing. Doesn't really exist anymore in the consumer space. Small losses in the beginning, clear path to profitability, and much more of an emphasis on margins. So you're getting pressured on limited capital, pressure to turn a profit, yet the retail landscape is becoming much more expensive to operate in. So what does that mean? For a lot of the companies that I work with, it means, number one, you have to be incredibly thoughtful about your distribution strategy and picking and choosing more carefully to build that data story that starts to say, look, we're winning, and go, what channels of trade, what geography, what retailers within those channels of geography, and also have, a sufficient amount of capital. It takes more capital than it did, frankly, when I was doing pop chips in the early 2000s. Probably the biggest change I've seen are those two areas.
And Bruce, I know where I get my legendary Target, USC. That's where I'm going. Anything in distribution that you notice have changed in your project?
Yeah, for sure. I think you mentioned already, COVID definitely changed the world. I think every single person on the planet only shopped online. And I don't think retail has ever really recovered completely. I think a lot of people have been comfortable shopping online, and I love going to brick and mortar stores. I love supporting them, but sadly, you see them closing. And early on at Quest, GNC was our largest partner. Oh, wow. Like at $30 million a year. I don't think they probably do $30 million a year as a whole company now. They're struggling. So the landscape's obviously changed, the distribution's changed, and a lot of my friends that start small companies are all direct to consumer now. They just want to stick on their website, feel it out, see how it goes before they even put their toe into retail, because retail's much tougher. You got to fight for space, and the unique thing about a lot of my friends are like, I made it to Target, I made it to Walmart. It's great to get on the shelf, but you got to make sure that stuff gets off the shelf, because it's really cool. You can tell all your friends, I'm on the shelf at Target. Hey, what happened? They kicked me off because I wasn't moving it. So sometimes it's okay to be direct to consumer, and you can probably get wealthy direct to consumer. Maybe you never need to go to retail.
I add one thing on that. Bruce bringing up a great point. There's a number of brands I see now that start off direct to consumer. They prove out their pricing, they understand the customer demographic, and then they might be, call it 10 to 30 million sales, somewhere in that size, where they then make the decision to go into retail, and then it's a much more successful transition because they're able to go to the retailer and say, I know who's going to buy my product better than you do, Mr. Retailer, and these are the SKUs you need to bring in for this reason, and they've got kind of the data to back it up on the e-commerce side. So I couldn't agree more.
That's important. You already have a proven track record. Here, look what I've done over the last 3 years. This sells. Bring it to your shelf now.
All right, for the audience, this is my last question, and then this is your warning. Have your questions ready. I want to see hands going like this when I say who has a question. So, final question for both of you. So, one of the things that we focus on at Mission Matters is personal brands and building personal brands. I notice in your career, Pat, if I think about whether it's Costco, Pop Chips, what you're doing advising boards for food companies or CPG companies, and then Bruce, as you mentioned, wearing the shirt 7 days a week, driving the truck, and always being branded with Legendary. So, open-ended for both of you, what is creating a strong, identifiable personal brand meant in your careers?
Is it personal? Like
your brand, yes. Mm-hmm.
And I know that's a big thing now. I still struggle with it. People say you got to have your own brand, and I've created my own brand a little reluctantly, to be honest. But I started doing public speaking, and I've done 50 or 60 podcasts, and now I guess I have the Bruce brand, which sounds kind of weird, a little egotistical, right? But I have now been identified as Bruce, and as I'm writing a book and I'm speaking in public, but it's still not comfortable for me because I'd much rather represent Legendary and be known as the Legendary guy or the Quest guy. For years, I literally was known, people see me in the gym and say, oh, this Quest guy. They didn't even know my name. That's a much better identity for me than being known as Bruce. That's just me.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
It does, but Bruce, you are a brand. I saw you, last event I saw you had on that big pink shirt, Legendary on that one. So you are a brand, even though you might not be comfortable with it, but you are a brand, Bruce, to be reckoned with.
Yeah, I get your reticence to think of it as a brand, Bruce. I have to admit, I cringed a little bit when I heard that because I don't think of it that way either. But I guess if I had to answer the question, it would be acting into your principles. You know, in my case, over the years have just seen a lot of, if there's private equity in the audience, I apologize in advance, a lot of entrepreneurs get taken advantage of by private equity, thinking they're on the same side of the table and not really realizing being in a position to then help founders and entrepreneurs scale their businesses to accomplish their goals as opposed to the private equity goals. And that involves telling them the truth versus what they want to hear. And sometimes that results in somebody not wanting to work with you, and that's okay. So acting into your principles can lead to people being very clear on what you're all about, and that then tends to